Hello YouTube, my name is Isabella and today I'm going to be discussing all the books I read in June. June was an interesting month. It simultaneously went by incredibly quickly for me and then also feels like it took forever. Some of the books that I completed at the very beginning of the month have almost not gone out of my head, but they feel like I read them so long ago. So this will be an interesting wrap up, but I'm hoping to do this quickly. Technically this video is supposed to be going up tomorrow, and usually my wrap ups are really long and take me a good chunk of time to edit. So we're gonna do this fast. I read 11 books in June. I wanted to read more, but it's just the way the cookie crumbled. It's fine. I actually DNF'd a book. I think the first DNF of this year. The first book I completed, I read via audio, and that is Wondersmith, The Calling of Morgan Crow. This is the second book in the Nevermore series, a very popular middle grade series that follows a young girl who's cursed to die on her 11th birthday, but instead she kind of gets abducted from this funky magician, and she has to try to join the ranks of a magical society so she can stay. Second book, I liked it, but I didn't like as much as the first one. I do always love a school setting, learning magic or learning to do with a magical society. That stuff I think is just really cool. I forgot to mention my content for the whole video. My content warnings might not be as detailed, or I might have missed some things. I always have the opportunity to miss stuff, but usually throughout the month as I'm reading the book, if I notice something, I'll write it down on a sticky note halfway through the month or even earlier. I just didn't do that at all because I don't know why. So I went back and looked up things, so they might not be as detailed, or I might have missed something, just as a warning. But content warnings for Wondersmith include bullying, death, kidnapping, and animal cruelty. I found this narrative a little bit frustrating because I also noticed this in the first book, but there were a lot of times where the adult characters are kind of irritating, or so much of the problems and the angst and the internal turmoil could be fixed if people just communicate. And now I do forgive it a bit more with children, but if the adults just, I don't know, communicated a bit, then things wouldn't be as drawn out. And I felt like this book went on for a little bit too long. I love the whimsy and wacky nature of the setting. I also really love Morgan Crow and her sort of sensibility, and it also was mildly traumatizing that she faces a lot of bullying and discrimination seems like the wrong word, but a lot of hatred from a lot of people, including the adults, for specific reasons. And it was really hard to read. It was breaking my little heart, but I appreciate that middle grade does, go there. And I have a lot of empathy for Morgan. I think I gave this one 3-ish stars. I then finally went and read Jade War by Fonda Lee. This is the sequel to Jade City, and I have an entire dedicated review for this, so I'll keep my thoughts brief here. Content warnings for Jade War include death, gore, gun violence, kidnapping, drug use / addiction, suicide ideation, and sex. I have been ranting and raving about this book in a couple of different videos, but I love it. I think it is such an elevation of the first book, which I also loved. I just love the way Fonda Lee decided to write this story. I think it's tightly packed and fantastically paced. Even our characters are put in such interesting positions and are tested so much. And I love it. I love her writing. I love the action. I love that this really twists and gets far more political than the first book. I'm eagerly anticipating the final book, but I'm nervous as well. I love this. I gave it 5 stars. I then went and read Blood Like Magic by Liselle Sambury. This was an arc and came out in June. It's the first book in a young adult futuristic duology where there's also magic. Our main character is descended from generations of magic, and when they hit a certain age or certain point in time in their lives, they have to do a sort of trial to pass to be granted magic by their ancestors. and our main character gets a notoriously difficult ancestor who tasks her with killing her first love. And one of her biggest problems is that she's never been in love. So she has to fall in love with a boy and then kill him. I thought the setting was really interesting because, like I mentioned, it is a futuristic story. It's set in Toronto, which I love. I thought the elements of like the science-y advanced technology blending with magic that goes back generations, I thought was a really interesting mix of the two. Some of the techie stuff I didn't care for, but most of the time when tech is described, to be honest, it just kind of goes over my head anyway. I forgot content warnings already. So content warnings for blood like magic include blood, scenes of like pretty descriptive like slavery / whipping scenes, racial violence, death of a parent, torture, murder, and transphobia. I think this does fall into the trap of a debut a little bit. Quite overly descriptive at times, especially in the beginning. I definitely was bothered by the amount of just full-on information dumps at the beginning. Like, just the first 20% was rough, and it was toying with a DNF because it was so brutal in the first bit. But after that, it gets vastly better. I really liked our main character and her dynamics with her family. They are very messy, but very much love each other. Waiting for the other shoe to drop made the romance interesting and stick out a little bit more in my head. I also was really, really intrigued by the ending and like sort of what the aftermath will be and the consequences of the finale. So I am interested to continue on with the series when the next and final book comes out. I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I then went and completed Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nian. This is the first book in a young adult fantasy trilogy set in a world where people and kind of animal-like beings are divided into separate caste systems, and humans are the bottom caste, and our main character actually gets abducted to be a paper girl, which is a concubine for the king. She also then is starting to have feelings for another paper girl whilst in the palace and like under heavy scrutiny, and has to deal with the consequences of that. Content warnings for this are a lot. It includes rape and sexual assault, gaslighting, manipulation, death and murder, abduction, loss of a parent, and grief. I actually really enjoyed this. I have seen so many split reviews on this. I was looking at some Goodreads reviews looking for some more content warnings because, again, I was a bit lazy this month, and literally I have not seen more split reviews in a long time. I did like our main character, although at times she is pretty annoying. Perspective can be slightly annoying at times, but I did like her and empathize with what she was going through. This is a weird one because I can't say like I enjoyed the plot of this story or I enjoyed where this went. This is it's a heavy book and it features heavy topics, but I enjoyed the way actually the author navigates it. I saw some critiques over how the main character is judgmental to how some of the other paper girls are coping or how they react to what's happened to them, and how the main character is judgmental towards them. The author exploring how like manipulation and gaslighting and how some of these things are told to these girls to be a good thing, and how traumatic and terrible that is. Not like our main character is an awful person for judging them, and how she was like herself processing her own trauma. I don't think that sentence made any sense, but a lot of people didn't like that she was like harsh towards some other girls, but I read it as like that's how she is processing what's happened to her, if that makes any sense. Also, who's going to be perfect at like 17 when these are your circumstances? I like the romance, although I do think it develops a little too quickly. We go from like 0 to 100 really, really fast. And I didn't love the writing, but I was hooked from this story. I was very stressed by this story. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was really interesting to be reading it at the time I was, because there has been a lot of critiques of the author and of the specific work as I was reading it, and that never has really happened to me. Usually if an author is being criticized or kind of displaying some bad behavior, it's maybe something I'm interested in but have not yet read, and usually I just don't bother reading with it, depending, you know, on their response. But this one, I was literally dead smack in the middle of it. So that was an interesting experience. And that's The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. I will leave Jess Owens's video detailing like the critiques over this. So this is an adult book that is set in like a sort of Big Brother like world where everyone basically has to fall in line. Our main character, he is a like caseworker, social worker who checks in on magical beings that are in orphanages to make sure like there's no abuse happening, but magical beings are discriminated against and hated in this society. So he gets put on a very top secret mission for very, very dangerous children and has to go there for like a month. And what he discovers is maybe that the problem isn't necessarily with the children and more like the society and stuff. A lot of people love this book, and I understand why, especially reading it. Like if you read it last year, I can imagine that this was a comforting story, but I took issue with how this has been pitched, because everyone keeps saying that this is like the most heartwarming thing ever, and whilst yeah, a lot of it is or can be heartwarming, I like nobody talks about the setting and how this is like a Big Brother type world, and that like really threw me. Like here I was thinking of like a delightful story and not like some of the heaviness that is faced, which actually is a good transition into the content warnings, including major fat phobia, child abuse, bigotry, discrimination, xenophobia, homophobia. There was sort of cognitive dissonance, I guess, in my head. I don't know if that's the best descriptor, but it's like, this is supposed to be delightful. These children are delightful, but like the world sucks, and that's not necessarily what I was going into it for. I liked the romance, although I couldn't honestly see why the love interest was so into our main character, because our main character kind of is not the greatest. Yes, he's on his own journey, blah blah blah. The manner of storytelling, actually I found it was really fun. I ended up giving this book 3 stars though, because while I did enjoy it, it was really, really hard to divorce what was going on in the book, current world events, especially with the inspirations of this book and what is being revealed with Indigenous communities and stuff. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. So I don't think this is a book I will talk about really on my channel going forward. And it's a bummer because I was really looking forward to it. I gave it 3 stars. Oh, also, I was really, really tired by the fat phobia through the whole book. The main character faces it very much externally and super internally as well. And again, when it's supposed to be a delightful book and you've got a character constantly talking about how he has a, quote, spare tire around his middle and how he feels uncomfortable all the time and how everyone's making him feel uncomfortable, it just was annoying. And like that phrase was used so much that I read this literally like 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, and I still remember it word for word. So that was annoying. I then went and read The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers. This is the 4th and final book in the Wayfarers series. It's a companion series of sci-fi book. I just realized this is supposed to be a quick wrap-up. This is not going to be a quick wrap-up, but this book is possibly the most meandering of the 4. It follows 4 or 5 different strangers who essentially kind of get stranded on a planet for a few days. This planet is essentially just like one giant rest stop for people to like kind of do layovers over their travels, and then they are not able to leave for a few days, and you just watch 4 strangers, very, very different strangers of different species, kind of having to navigate. Content warnings for this one include a bit of xenophobia. Nothing happens in this story, and I honestly enjoyed it. I loved just watching 4 very, very different individuals coming together, acknowledging differences, and like catering towards other people's people's differences. I just love the emphasis on like accommodation and acknowledgement of differences. I understand why I've seen her books described as like hope punk stories, because it is a really nice thing to see. And like, obviously the very distant societies aren't perfect, but just watching them all try and work together, it was nice. I really loved it. I enjoyed a lot of the sort of mini arcs that the characters sort of work through. I say a mini arc because, again, you're only with them for maybe a week total, but watching them work towards and work through certain things, I thought was really nice and well done in the short span of time that we are with the characters. I gave this one 4 stars. I then went and completed One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This is a romance book following August, who's just moved to Brooklyn. She's like been sort of running all her life and kind of finds herself in this little found family, and then is really struck by this like really super hot girl on the subway, and then quickly finds out that our love interest Jane is caught in time and initially from the 70s and is just stuck on the train. I quite enjoyed this story, like actually really enjoyed this story, but there were a couple things that bothered me and it kind of made my rating and stuff go down. They stick out to me like a sore thumb. I don't like third person present tense, and both Casey McQuiston's books are written in third person present. I can't stand it. I don't like it. I don't like that writing choice at all, and it's really hard for me to adjust to it. The main couple I really enjoyed. I did really love their dynamic and how they worked through certain things. However, again, good segue, I don't love romances that have huge external circumstances keeping the couple that's apart. When I read a contemporary romance or like a romance book in general, I want it to be like them working through a lot of internal struggles and like just working through those things, as opposed to like when I'm reading fantasy or whatever, I'm a bit more okay with like big external things like keeping the couple apart. But when it's romance, I want internal stuff. And I also hate time travel, which I know this isn't a time travel book, but it is like time travel adjacent. So there was just a few things that just don't work for me, but I do think this is a good book. I do think this will appeal to a lot of people. I genuinely really enjoyed it. I loved the found family. I loved the character development, and I loved especially some themes and emphasis on like queer history and knowing and acknowledging the queer people that came before us and all the fighting that they did to like have rights for queer people. And I thought the author's note was really touching and it made me cry. I gave this 3.5 stars. I did. It's one that's like enjoyment wise way higher, but there were a couple things that did bother me. I also forgot to mention content warnings because I suck at this. Content warnings include homophobia, grief, and violence. I was gonna say we're almost done. I still have like 4 or 5 books to talk about. This is annoying. I'm very quickly going to talk about my DNF though, because I think this was around the time I DNF'd it, and that's Shit Actually by Lindy West, I think. This is a series collection of anecdotal critiques of like movies, which honestly appeals to me. I love critical analysis, even critical analysis of stuff where I'm not maybe familiar with the source material, but I started listening to the audiobook and maybe got an hour through it, and I just didn't love the sense of humor. I didn't love that the author, maybe this would have worked better reading it, because when the author is reading their audiobook, they say it and then do it the exact way they intend, which is normally a good thing, but because it's supposed to be very, very funny and the humor wasn't working for me, it felt like I couldn't breathe from all like the humor and jokes that just weren't working for me. I then completed A Crown of Wishes by Roshni Chokshi. This is the companion to The Star-Touched Queen and a book I've been meaning to read for years, literal years. This follows the main characters from that book's sister, and she is basically in like real dire straits. She kind of gets coerced to be the prince's like partner in this magical tournament, and if they win this magical tournament, they both get granted a wish that would real help them because they're both like in trouble. That was not a great synopsis, but we're sticking with it. Content warnings for this include death of a parent, grief, murder, and attempted assault. When I was reading it, I was thinking like, yeah, this is fine, sure, whatever. It's very quick, fast-paced, easy to go in and out, completed story, one and done essentially, but it hasn't really sat like super great in my feelings. It was just like fine, it's whatever. I think I figured out what my issue is usually with Rashi Chakshi's writing is she's very description heavy, which usually I like, but she's very description heavy in sort of like the, I don't know how to better describe it, and like the ether or like the feelings of things, and not actually doing her purple prosy thing for what's actually going on. And so I kind of sometimes feel lost as to what's actually going on in the plot. I also think this is constructed incredibly weirdly because we've got 3 perspectives in here. One perspective is first person, the other 2 are third person. One of the perspectives doesn't get folded into it here, at least into a third or like halfway through, which was another sort of jarring thing. So I just think the construction of this story is pretty strange. I know it's just not going to stick with me. It's fine. I am very glad that I completed it. I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. I then completed the first book in the 100,000... No. I completed the first book in the Inheritance trilogy, The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. This is a bind-up of the 3 books, which are more like companion stories. I listened to the audiobook because I just didn't want to deal with reading this huge thing. This follows a main character who has essentially been summoned by her grandfather, who is the current ruler of the 100,000 kingdoms. He has like all the power in the society, and then he like kind of surprisingly names her as one of his heirs, so she is now thrown into the mix to fight to be the heir and ruler of the 100,000 kingdoms. She has absolutely no interest in becoming heir. She just wants to be there to figure out and kind of deduce what happened from the death of her mother. This is a really interesting take on fantasy and very much written in the vein of N.K. Jemisin. She has a very distinct style of storytelling and I really, really like it. I find her stuff to be incredibly unique. The world building is interesting because you're not given a lot to go off of in the world and what's happening, like again in like the surroundings, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is the setting here, which is really cool, and that mix of like so much magic, it's kind of sciencey, or so much science, it's kind of magic-y. I liked our main character. I thought she was really interesting. I love the elements of gods in here and how the gods work in here were really interesting. I just love the morality behind like immortal, magical, all-powerful beings who can't be currently their immortal, all-powerful selves. So that I thought was really, really interesting. This is really heavy, by the way. Content warnings for a lot of stuff. Rape, sexual assault, torture, incest, loss of a parent, grief, slavery, a lot interesting sexual content and violence. I think this was a really interesting take on a political fantasy and a character who is way out of her depths. I forgot to mention, I gave that one as well 4 stars. I also finally completed Across the Greengrass Fields by Sean McGuire. I finally called it the right thing, because I constantly call it Across the Green Fields. I get confused all the time. This is the 6th novella in the Wayward Children series, and by far the weakest in my opinion. This is another one of like the entry points or standalone parts of the story. It's like almost entirely, I think fully separate from the rest of the series, or like the main plot thread. It's set in like a very horse girl-esque world and follows an intersex main character. Content warnings for this include bullying, interphobia, and kidnapping. I really enjoyed the setting and world, which is interesting to me because I don't like horses. I, growing up, could be described as like the opposite of a horse girl. never really did like the ponies, centaurs, unicorns thing, but I really liked the world and how everything worked. I liked the various different magical creatures that we come across, and I loved the like found family that our main character finds. I thought the first half of the story was actually really strong. I liked the way it was paced. I liked the way it described long periods of time but didn't feel rushed at all. But the second half of the story feels incredibly rushed to me. The way everything wraps up within like 10 pages, I thought was deeply unsatisfying. I enjoyed Reagan a lot, and her journey and her development with her friendship there, really enjoyed. And I like the way Shauna McGuire writes. Her prose itself I really like, and that's why I come back to these books again and again, even though they're not like all-time favorites, but I gave this one 3 stars. The final book I read in June was Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. This is a middle grade story, the first book in a series. I don't know when it's supposed to be wrapped up, and I thought this was utterly fucking delightful. This follows a main girl whose brother has been missing for the past year, and the police essentially think that he was like up to no good, but Amari knows better and she knows her brother. She then discovers that there is like an entirely different world full of magical beings existing among humans, and she is going to try and enroll in the society to find out what's happened to her brother. I loved this book. I thought it was so friggin' delightful. Content warnings for this include bullying, racism, discrimination, and grief. I think Amari is a fantastic main character. I absolutely loved her. I empathized with everything she was going through. I loved how strong she was when facing what she was facing. I absolutely adore her. She is such a gem of a character. I liked the world. I thought it was really fun and quirky. I liked how like basically there are no holds bar. Every magical creature exists. Can't wait to possibly explore more in like a different settings. I also deeply empathize with Amari. I think I mentioned that before, but she faces a lot of like bullying and hatred from a lot of people for different reasons, and it was hard to read. And like this poor child is literally being bullied from not only children but adults, and it was hard, but I think well written and well done. I was actually pretty surprised by certain reveals and twists throughout the story, which was a pleasant surprise in and of itself. I love Amari's faith in her brother and her family, and I just thought this was an all-around great time. I think this is paced fantastically, really fun story with a lot of heart. I gave this 5 stars. I was so surprised by it, and I loved it so much, and I know a lot of people have been buzzing about it, but 5 stars for a middle grade for me is quite rare, and I loved it. I cannot wait for the sequel, which I think the cover has just somewhat recently been announced. Yeah, cannot wait. Anyway, so those are all the books that I read in June. I think this was the opposite of a short wrap-up. I think I didn't shut up throughout this video, so that's great. But part and parcel with me and my channel, we just have to live with it. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite read of June was, and if you have any thoughts on any of the books that I mentioned here, I'd love to chat about them in the comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you again pretty soon, hopefully. Bye.